At 3:17 in the morning, I was kneeling behind a hot server rack with hands coated in dust. Outside, the genius team was passed out on beanbags, muttering about Patagonia vests. I did not need them to wake up. I only needed 10 lines of code. Those 10 lines would not just save a $150 million deal. They would kick open a door the CTO had locked with his ego for 3 years. My name is Nora Watson. I am 32 years old. To the daylight staff at Crest Dynamics in Cleveland, Ohio, I am not a person. I am a function. I am the entity that ensures the coffee machine is descaled and the blinking green lights in the server room do not turn red while the real people are sleeping in their suburban beds. My official title is Network Operations Night Support. It sounds technical and important. It is not. In the grand hierarchy of a tech startup desperate to go public, I am the janitor of the internet. I wipe up the digital spills left behind by the people who make 6 figures and wear hoodies to board meetings. The office at 3 in the morning has a specific texture. The air is recycled and cold, smelling faintly of ozone and stale energy drinks. The silence is heavy, broken only by the aggressive hum of the cooling units keeping the server racks from melting down. This is my domain. I move through the rows of black cabinets like a ghost haunting a machine. My job on paper is simple. I replace bad cables. I hard reset router clusters when they hang. I monitor the dashboard that looks like the cockpit of a spaceship, but mostly just tells me if the internet is on or off, if a light turns red. I follow a checklist laminated 3 years ago by a manager who no longer works here. If the checklist fails, I call someone who matters. That is the rule. Do not touch the logic. Do not look at the code. Just keep the hardware breathing, but that is just the surface. The reality is that when you are invisible, you see everything. People treat me like furniture with legs. They leave their whiteboards full of sensitive architecture diagrams when they go home. They leave their terminal windows open with root privileges exposed. They talk about layoffs and acquisitions in the break room, while I'm standing right there refilling the water cooler. As if my ears stop working because I wear a gray uniform polo, I know which senior engineer is cheating on his wife because he uses the company Slack for his affair. I know which project manager is padding her hours. And I know that Crest Dynamics is terrifyingly close to exploding. The bomb has a price tag, $150 million. That is the value of the contract with the National Grid Reliability Office, the NGRO. It is a federal agency. Fictitious enough to sound boring, but real enough to pay the bills for the next decade. We are building their new grid redundancy coordination system. It is supposed to simulate a catastrophic power failure across the eastern seaboard and prove that our software can reroute power in milliseconds to save hospitals and traffic lights. It is a massive, complex beast of a system. It is also held together by duct tape and prayers. The deadline for the final integration test is 48 hours away. If we pass, the federal government signs the check. If we fail, Crest runs out of runway in 3 months. The pressure is physical. You can feel it in the hallways. It makes people snap at each other. It makes the day shift frantic and sloppy. This brings me to the so-called genius team. They are currently passed out in the collaborative breakout space just outside the glass walls of the server room. There are 5 of them. They are sprawled on beanbag chairs and expensive ergonomic sofas, mouths open, drooling onto pillows they brought from home. They have been pulling 16-hour days for 2 weeks. They call them sprints. They wear their exhaustion like a badge of honor. They tweet about the grind. They post photos of their empty pizza boxes with captions about changing the world. Then there is Gavin Klein. Gavin is our Chief Technology Officer. He is the architect of this chaos. He is 35, wears limited edition sneakers that cost more than my car, and speaks exclusively in buzzwords. He talks about synergy and disruption and breaking things fast. The problem is that he usually breaks things that I have to fix. Gavin is the kind of man who believes his intuition is better than documentation. He wrote the core architecture for the NGRO project 3 years ago. He treats it like Holy Scripture. No one is allowed to question the Klein kernel. If there is a bug, it is not his code. It is the compiler. It is the hardware. It is the phase of the moon. It never belongs to Gavin. Tonight. Gavin went home at 10 in the evening. He told the team to push through. He said he had a vision. He said he trusted them to execute. Then he left them with a memory leak in the data ingestion module that they have been chasing for 6 hours. They finally collapsed around 2. Convinced they had patched it. They had not patched it. I know this because I'm looking at the logs. I have what the company calls pseudo access. It is a limited administrative token intended for emergency monitoring. It lets me view the system state, restart specific services, and access the read-only version of the codebase. It is designed to let me be a pair of eyes for the on-call engineer, so they do not have to wake up for a false alarm. It is not designed for me to understand what I'm seeing. That is the assumption. They think I am a cable monkey. They think I do not know Python or Go or Rust. They think I cannot read a stack trace. They are wrong. I sit at a forgotten workstation in the corner of the Network Operations Center. This desk is my cockpit. The chair has a wobbly wheel. The keyboard has a sticky shift key. No one else sits here. From this vantage point, I watch the heartbeat of the NGRO simulation. The screen is a waterfall of text. Most of it is green. Green is good. Green means the grid is stable, but buried in the flow, ticking like a bomb timer, is a red line that appears every 400 seconds. It is subtle. It is a latency spike in the handshake protocol between the primary load balancer and the backup generator nodes. It is tiny, 200 milliseconds, to a human. That is the blink of an eye. To a grid reliability system managing millions of volts, it is an eternity. It is a failure condition. I lean forward, resting my chin on my hand. I have been watching this error pattern for weeks. It started small, just a few milliseconds. Then it grew. The day team does not see it because they are looking at the averages. They are looking at the big dashboards that smooth out the outliers. They are looking at what they want to see. Gavin wants to see a perfect system, so he configured the monitoring tools to ignore transient spikes under 300 milliseconds. He calls it noise reduction. I call it blindness. I tracked the error down 2 nights ago. It is a race condition in the handoff logic. When the data load gets too heavy, the system tries to write to the database and the cache at the exact same time. Usually, it works, but sometimes, when the traffic is just right, they collide. The system hangs. It waits. It times out. Then it retries. That retry creates the spike. If this happens during the live demo with the federal agents, the simulation will not just lag, it will crash. The grid will go dark. The $150 million will evaporate. I look out the glass wall at the sleeping engineers, the genius team. They are good kids, mostly. They are fresh out of Stanford and MIT. They are brilliant at algorithms, but they do not understand how the machine breathes. They treat the code like pure math. They forget that it lives on physical silicon that gets hot and tired, and they are terrified of Gavin. They would rather patch a symptom a dozen times than tell Gavin his core architecture has a flaw. So the bug remains. I have the power to fix it. That is the irony. My pseudo access gives me write permissions to the local configuration files if I invoke a specific emergency protocol. It is called the break glass procedure. It is meant for when the building is literally on fire or the data center is flooding. It logs everything. It sends an alert to the entire executive team. It triggers an immediate audit. But technically, I can open the file, I can change the code, I can save the deal. I spin slightly in my broken chair. The silence of the room presses against my ears. This is the dilemma of the night shift. We are the guardians of the dark. We keep the lights on for a world that refuses to acknowledge us. If I do nothing, the project fails. When it fails, Gavin will not blame himself. He will not blame his genius team. He will look for a variable that he cannot control. He will look for a scapegoat. He will look at the logs. He will see that the crash happened during the night hours. He will ask why the night support did not catch the warning signs. He will ask why I did not wake someone up. He will ask what I'm even doing here if I'm just going to let the company burn. And if I fix it, if I touch the holy code, then I am a rogue element. I am an uneducated night worker putting her greasy fingers on the crown jewels. I am a security risk. I am a liability. Gavin will fire me for insubordination before he even checks to see if the code works. I am damned if I do. And I am damned if I do not. But there is a third option. An option that requires precision. An option that requires me to be exactly what they think I am. Invisible. I look at the clock. It is now 3:22 in the morning. The latency spike hits again. 310 milliseconds. It is getting worse. The system is groaning under the weight of the test data. I stand up and walk over to the server rack. I put my hand on the metal casing of Unit 7. It is warm, vibrating. Inside, the processors are screaming. You see, the thing about being invisible is that you get used to the shadows. You learn how to move without making a sound. You learn how to leave no footprints. You learn that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. And the quietest person is the one holding all the cards. Gavin Klein thinks he built a kingdom. He thinks he is the king. But he forgot one thing. Kings sleep. The janitor does not. I walked back to my desk. I pulled the keyboard closer. The keys were stiff, resisting my fingers. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was like a pistol shot in the quiet room. Outside, one of the engineers snorted in his sleep and rolled over. I brought up the terminal. The cursor blinked at me. A steady, rhythmic pulse. It asked me a question. Who are you? I am Nora Watson. I am the night support. I am the woman who changes the toner cartridges and restocks the fridge. And I am about to save this entire company whether they like it or not. I typed the command to elevate my privileges. The system hesitated, then granted access. The text turned amber, warning colors. I did not hesitate. I knew exactly where the line was. I knew exactly which variable needed to be changed. I knew the syntax better than I knew my own social security number. 10 lines. That was all it would take. 10 lines of logic to untangle the knot Gavin had tied 3 years ago. 10 lines to make the traffic flow smoothly. 10 lines to secure $150 million. I took a breath. The air tasted of potential disaster. I liked it. I started to type. The war room was a glass fishbowl situated in the dead center of the open plan office. It was designed to look transparent and inviting, a symbol of the company's commitment to radical candor. In reality, at 3 in the morning, it looked like a crime scene where the victim was common sense. I pushed the heavy glass door open. It swung silent and smooth on expensive hinges. The air inside was 10 degrees warmer than the rest of the floor, thick with the smell of stale pepperoni, dry erase markers, and the distinct, metallic tang of overheating electronics. I was not supposed to be in here. The cleaning crew had already made their rounds at midnight, but they knew better than to touch the whiteboards. The boards were covered in frantic scribbles. Arrows pointed to boxes pointed to clouds, and clouds rained down jagged lightning bolts of data. It was a chaotic map of the last 3 weeks of panic. In the corner, a pyramid of empty energy drink cans stood as a monument to sleep deprivation. A forgotten laptop sat open on the mahogany conference table. Its screensaver had been disabled. It was broadcasting a live feed of the integration logs, and the logs were bleeding red. I stopped. My original intention had been to find a comfortable chair because my back was screaming from 3 hours of re-racking switches in the cold aisle. But the red light washed over the room, pulsating with a rhythmic dread. It caught my eye and held it. I walked around the table, careful not to step on the power bricks and Ethernet cables snaking across the carpet like vipers. I stood over the laptop. It belonged to the lead systems architect, a man who drove a Porsche and did not know how to exit the Vim text editor. I leaned in. The error scrolling past was not a simple crash. It was a loop, a recursive death spiral. The system was screaming. I recognized the pattern immediately. It was a ghost I had seen haunting the periphery of the network for months, a specter that only appeared when the data load hit a specific, suffocating density. The error message was cryptic to the uninitiated. It read simply, handoff sync failure, timeout, retrying, to the 45 engineers who had built this thing. This probably looked like a network glitch. They would blame the bandwidth. They would blame the hardware. They would blame me. But I knew the rhythm of this machine. I listened to its heartbeat every night while they slept. I knew that Team Alpha, the database guys, always forgot to close their connections. I knew that Team Beta, the front-end wizards, wrote queries that were too heavy for the pipes. But this was different. This was structural. I sat down in the architect's leather chair. It was still warm. I pulled the laptop closer. I did not touch the keyboard yet. I just watched. The error was happening in the handoff protocol. The National Grid Reliability Office required a failover time of less than 50 milliseconds. If the primary node went down, the backup had to catch the falling data instantly. The code was trying to pass the baton, but under the immense weight of the simulation data, terabytes of simulated power grid fluctuations, the primary node was stuttering. It was signaling that it was ready to hand off, but it was still writing to the cache. The backup node received the signal, reached out to grab the data, found the file locked, and panicked. It was a race condition, a classic, deadly race condition that only manifested when the system was pushed to the absolute edge of its capacity. I needed to be sure. I minimized the log window and opened the version control history. I felt a spike of adrenaline. If anyone walked in right now, I would be fired before I could stand up. I was the night support. I was allowed to reset routers. I was not allowed to audit the source code of a $150 million project. I scrolled through the diffs, the record of changes made in the last 48 hours. I was looking for the trigger. I found it in a commit pushed at 7 in the evening by a junior developer, approved by Gavin Klein himself. They had increased the buffer size to improve performance. It was a logical move on paper. Bigger buffer means more data throughput. But they had not adjusted the timeout threshold on the backup node. They had made the baton heavier without giving the runner more time to grab it. I checked the third source, the failover simulation results. They were hidden in a subfolder that nobody looked at because the summary dashboard always showed green until the very last second. I opened the raw data. Failure, failure, failure. Every time the simulation hit 90% capacity, the handoff choked. The backup node waited for 10 milliseconds, then 20, then 50. By the time the lock released, the synchronization window had closed. The system threw an error, then tried again, and again, and again. The retries were eating up the processor cycles, compounding the lag until the whole architecture seized up and died. I sat back, staring at the screen. The red light reflected in the glass walls of the war room, making it look like I was sitting inside a furnace. This was the kill shot. If they ran the live demo for the federal agents in 2 days, the system would hold up for the first 10 minutes. Everyone would smile and shake hands. Then, as the simulation ramped up to peak load, the screen would freeze, the grid would go dark, the contract would vanish. I knew exactly how to fix it. It was not even hard. It was an elegant, simple adjustment. I needed to instruct the backup node to check the lock status before attempting the grab. And I needed to add a dynamic wait time that scaled with the buffer size. It was logic so basic, it should have been in the first draft. But here was the problem. If I fixed it, I would have to commit the code. My name, or at least my user ID, would be stamped on the solution. The next morning, Gavin Klein would see that a night support technician had modified the core kernel. He would not see a savior. He would see a threat. He would ask, "Who gave you permission to think?" He would ask, "Why were you snooping in a repository above your security clearance?" He would fire me for unauthorized access, and then he would probably revert my fix out of spite, crashing the project anyway. But if I did nothing, I looked at the whiteboard again. I saw the drawings of the future they imagined. Bonuses, promotions, stock options. They were so confident. They were so arrogant. And they were walking off a cliff. If the project failed, the fallout would be nuclear. The investors would pull out. Hallocrest Dynamics would pivot to something desperate, shedding staff to stay afloat. The first people to go would not be the geniuses in the hoodies. It would be the support staff. It would be me. And before they let me go, they would look for a reason. They would scour the logs. They would see that I was on duty during the nights when the instability started. They would say, "Why did Nora not flag the latency? Why did Nora not escalate the warning signs? They would make me the villain of their incompetence. I looked down at my hands. They were rough from handling serrated cable ties and cheap sanitizer. These hands kept their digital world spinning. But I was not allowed to touch the wheel. The injustice of it rose up in my throat like bile. It was not just about the job. It was about the 3 years I had spent watching them pat each other on the back for mediocrity while I swept up their messes. It was about the fact that I knew this system better than the people who built it. And yet, I had to ask permission to use the bathroom key. I could not let them fail. Not because I cared about their success, but because I refused to be the collateral damage of their failure. I refused to let Gavin Klein use my silence as a shield for his ineptitude, but I could not be seen. I closed the laptop lid. I stood up. The war room was still silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner. I knew what I had to do. I needed to perform surgery without leaving a scar. I needed to be a ghost who could wield a scalpel. I walked out of the glass room, leaving the red logs burning in the dark behind me. I headed back to my corner, to my dirty keyboard and my sticky chair. I had made my choice. I was going to save the $150 million deal, but I was going to do it in a way that would leave a trap door waiting for Gavin, right under his expensive sneakers. I was going to fix the code, and I was going to make sure that when the truth finally came out, it would not be me who was afraid of the light. The workstation in the corner was known as the exile desk. It was where interns sat during their first week, before they were assigned a real computer, and it was where broken peripherals went to die. The keyboard was a membrane model from a decade ago, yellowed by sunlight and caked with the gray dust of neglect. The I key stuck if you did not hit it with sufficient violence. The mousepad was peeling at the corners, revealing the rubberized foam beneath. It was disgusting. It was perfect. I sat down and pulled the chair in. The wheels dragged across the carpet, catching on a loose thread, but the sound was swallowed by the ambient drone of the server fans. I did not turn on the desk lamp. The glow from the dual monitors was enough. I did not need to see my hands. I knew the layout of a standard keyboard better than I knew the lines on my own palms. I logged in using the local admin credentials. These were not my personal credentials. They were a legacy root account left over from the original system setup 3 years ago. A backdoor that Gavin had created for himself and then forgotten to close. He probably thought it was clever at the time. Now, it was my way in. The terminal window opened, a black square of infinite possibility. I navigated to the directory containing the handoff protocol. The path was deep, buried under layers of unnecessary abstraction that the genius team used to make their work look more complex than it actually was. I found the file, Sync Controller, Pi. I took a breath. This was it. The moment I touched this file, I was no longer just observing, I was intervening. In the eyes of the law, this could be construed as unauthorized modification of corporate property. In the eyes of engineering, it was a rescue mission. I cracked my knuckles. Then I began to type. I did not rewrite the whole module. That would be amateur. It would change the file size too drastically and trigger the automated diff checkers that ran at dawn. I needed to be surgical. I located the block of code responsible for the thread lock. It was a rigid, uncompromising demand for resources. It screamed, "Give me everything, or I stop." I deleted the demand. In its place, I wrote 10 lines. Line 1, I introduced a non-blocking request. Instead of demanding the lock, the system would now politely ask if the lock was available. Line 2, I added a conditional check. If the answer was no, the system would not panic. It would pause. Line 3, I implemented an exponential backoff. Wait 1 millisecond, then 2, then 4. Give the primary node room to breathe. Line 4 through 7. I created a failsafe. This was the safety net the geniuses had ignored. If the primary node was still silent after the pause, I instructed the system to divert the data stream to a temporary holding buffer in the local memory. It was a pocket, a place to put the baton so it did not hit the floor. Line 8, I changed the timeout threshold from 50 milliseconds to 200. It was a simple variable change, but it bought the system a lifetime of operational clearance. Line 9, I linked the secondary thread to the holding buffer, allowing it to pick up the data asynchronously once the traffic spike passed. Line 10. I added a garbage collection command to wipe the buffer once the handoff was complete, leaving no trace of the detour. 10 lines. That was all it took. I stared at the code. It was clean. It was efficient. It was everything Gavin Klein was not. It did not try to be clever. It just worked. Now came the hardest part. I had to save it. If I saved it without a comment, the version control system would flag it as an anomaly. If I signed it with my name, I was dead. If I signed it with the admin account name, Gavin would know someone had compromised his back door. I moved the cursor to the commit message field. I needed something that sounded like it belonged there. Something that a sleep-deprived engineer might have written to themselves and forgotten. I typed 5 words. Check sync wrapper on handoff. It was imperative, vague, and technical. It sounded like a note to self that had accidentally been committed as code. It was the kind of sloppy commit message that happened 10 times a day in this office. It would blend in perfectly with the noise. I hit enter. The code pushed to the local repository. Now I had to test it. I opened the simulation dashboard. The interface was sleek and dark, designed to look like a spy movie prop. I selected the stress test, max load scenario. This was the one that had been crashing the system for 3 weeks. I clicked run. The graphs began to climb. The CPU usage spiked. The memory allocation bar filled up like a pint glass being poured too fast. I watched the latency counter. It held steady at 20 milliseconds, then 30, then 40. This was the danger zone. This was where the old code would choke. The load hit 95%. The red line on the graph approached the ceiling. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a physical thudding that seemed louder than the servers. The latency spiked to 100 milliseconds, then 150, and then it dropped. It dropped back to 20. The handoff had happened. The primary node had stuttered. My code had caught the data in the buffer, waited for the opening, and slipped it through to the backup. The system did not crash. The light stayed green. I watched the simulation run for another 10 minutes. It was flawless. The $150 million deal was safe. The grid would hold. I sat back in the broken chair. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel like pumping my fist in the air, but there was no adrenaline rush. There was only a cold, quiet satisfaction. It was the feeling of slotting a puzzle piece into place and watching the picture become whole. I looked around the room. The genius team was still asleep. Gavin was at home in his expensive bed. None of them knew that their careers had just been saved by the woman who cleaned the coffee pot. The fan of the workstation whirred, a steady mechanical applause. That was enough for me. I prepared to log off. I wiped the terminal history. I closed the windows. I was about to shut down the machine when a thought occurred to me. Gavin, when he saw this fix tomorrow, he would take credit for it. That was inevitable. He would tell the CEO that he had a late-night epiphany. He would tell the team he pushed a hotfix remotely. He would build another layer of his legend on my foundation. But worse than that, if he ever dug deep enough to find out it was not him, he would try to bury the evidence. He would delete the logs. He would scrub the commit history. He would make sure no one could ever prove that the janitor had outcoded the CTO. I could not let that happen. I did not want the credit. Not yet. But I needed a shield. I opened the system configuration tool one last time. I navigated to the logging pipeline. This was the black box of the network, the recorder that tracked every command, every file change, every user login. I located the setting for log retention. Currently, it was set to standard. Overwrite after 30 days. I changed it. I switched the mode to worm. Write once, read many. In the industry, we called this tamper-evident mode. It meant that once a log entry was written, it became stone. It could not be modified. It could not be deleted. It could not be overwritten. Even an admin with root privileges could not erase the past without physically destroying the hard drive. I applied the setting. A small lock icon appeared next to the log stream. I smiled. It was a small twist. A subtle trap. If Gavin tried to erase the history of tonight to hide my involvement or to cover his own tracks, he would find himself hitting a wall, and the attempt to hit that wall would itself be logged as a permanent record. I had not just fixed the system, I had turned the lights on in a room where Gavin liked to work in the dark. I shut down the computer. I pulled a bottle of isopropyl alcohol and a microfiber cloth from my cleaning cart. I wiped the keyboard. I wiped the mouse. I wiped the power button. I removed the oil from my fingertips, the DNA of my presence. When I was done, the workstation looked exactly as unloved as it had an hour ago. I walked out of the network operations center. I passed the break room where the geniuses were beginning to stir, groaning as the first light of dawn hit the windows. I did not look at them. I did not offer to make coffee. I clocked out at the rear entrance. The security guard, an older man named Earl who spent his shifts doing crossword puzzles, nodded at me without looking up. "Night, Nora," he mumbled. "Morning, Earl," I said. I pushed through the heavy steel doors and stepped out into the cool, gray air of Cleveland. It was 5:15 in the morning. The streetlights were flickering off. The city was waking up. I walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, my bus. The number 19. Arrived 3 minutes later. I climbed the steps and swiped my pass. The bus was mostly empty. Just a few other shift workers with tired eyes and lunch pails. I took a seat near the back window. As the bus pulled away, I looked back at the Hollow Crest building. It was a sleek glass monolith reflecting the rising sun. Inside, they were about to wake up to a miracle. They were about to celebrate a victory they did not earn. I clutched my bag on my lap. Inside was my empty Tupperware container and a paperback novel I had not had time to read. I was carrying a secret worth $150 million, and I was carrying it home like leftovers. I rested my head against the cold glass of the window. Let them have their morning. Let Gavin have his moment. I knew something they did not. The logs were watching, and I was patient. The Hallowcrest Dynamics internal messaging channels were not just active, they were hyperventilating. I could hear the notification chimes pinging off phones and laptops all across the open floor plan. It sounded like a casino where everyone had just hit the jackpot at the exact same second. Fixed overnight. Genius patch. We are saved. The messages cascaded down the general channel in a blur of emojis and exclamation points. I stood by the kitchenette, methodically restocking the K-cups, hazelnut, French roast, breakfast blend. I aligned them in perfect rows while the room around me erupted in a frenzy of relief. The air, usually heavy with the smell of anxiety and stale sweat, now smelled of victory and expensive artisanal donuts. Gavin Klein stood in the absolute center of the room. He looked like a man who had just invented fire and was graciously allowing the peasants to warm their hands. He was holding a cup of coffee that I had brewed 20 minutes ago. He took a sip, grimaced slightly, and then set it down on a high-top table as if the liquid was beneath him, around him. The genius team was vibrating with excitement. They were high on adrenaline and the sudden, miraculous absence of impending doom. They clapped each other on the back. They spun in their Aeron chairs. They looked at Gavin with the wide, trusting eyes of golden retrievers looking at a tennis ball. "I just had a feeling," Gavin said. His voice was projected just loud enough to carry to the executive offices without sounding like a shout. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the architecture just rotated in my mind. I realized we were choking the handoff. It was a classic bottleneck disguised as a latency issue. He paused for effect. A junior developer nodded vigorously, absorbing the wisdom. "So I hopped on," Gavin continued, waving a hand vaguely in the air. "I did not want to wake anyone up. I figured I would just guide the logic a little, nudge it into the right lane. You know how it is. Sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty to show the code who is boss." I placed a stack of napkins on the counter. I smoothed the edges. I did not look up. If I looked up, I might have rolled my eyes so hard they would have detached from my optic nerves. He was lying. It was not a bold, direct lie. It was a lie of omission and implication. He never explicitly said, "I wrote those 10 lines." He said he hopped on. He said he nudged it. He created a space where the truth was optional, and he let his reputation fill the void. To these kids, Gavin was the brilliant architect. Of course he fixed it. Who else could have navigated the labyrinth of the Klein kernel in the dead of night? Certainly not the woman currently wiping coffee rings off the counter. The glass door to the corner office opened. Marianne Voss stepped out. Marianne was our CEO. She was 45, sharp-featured, and moved with the terrifying efficiency of a shark in a silk blouse. She did not celebrate. She executed. She held a tablet in her hand, and for the first time in 3 months, she did not look like she was calculating severance packages. The room went quiet. Gavin straightened up, puffing out his chest slightly. "Gavin," Marianne said. Her voice was cool and dry. "I just got off the phone with the director at the NGRO." Gavin smiled. It was a humble smile, practiced. "How did they take the news?" "Marianne, they are impressed," she said. She glanced at the tablet. "They ran their own pre-validation on the patch this morning. Their technical lead called it a lean, elegant solution. He specifically mentioned the proactive failsafe in the wrapper. He said it showed a maturity in risk management that they rarely see in private sector startups. Risk management is the name of the game," Gavin said, nodding gravely. "I wanted to make sure we were not just fixing the bug, but future-proofing the pipeline." "Well," Marianne said, lowering the tablet, "they are moving forward. The signing is back on for Friday. Good work, Gavin, and good work, team. Take the afternoon off. Go home. Sleep. You earned it." A cheer went up. It was loud and raucous. Someone popped a bottle of Prosecco that had been sitting in the fridge since Christmas. Foam sprayed onto the carpet. I made a mental note that I would have to clean that up later. Marianne turned and walked back into her office, closing the door firmly. She did not ask to see the code. She did not ask for a timestamp. She had the results she wanted, and the narrative fit the business model. The brilliant CTO saves the day. The stock value is preserved. The world makes sense. I picked up my cleaning caddy and moved toward the supply closet. I felt heavy. It was a strange sensation. I was not angry that Gavin took the credit. I expected that. That was the tax I paid for remaining invisible. What bothered me was how easy it was. They built a pedestal for him out of my work, and they all climbed up on it to cheer, completely unaware that the structural integrity of their hero was zero. I was the foundation, and they were stomping on me. I reached the back of the office, near the server room. This was the quiet zone. The developers were all clustered near the front, fighting over the donuts and Prosecco, but one person was not celebrating. Noah Pierce sat at his desk. Noah was different. He was 24, quiet, and actually read the documentation. He was the only one on the team who said thank you when I replaced his monitor cable last month. He wore oversized sweaters and typed with a soft, rhythmic cadence that was almost musical. Right now, he was not typing. He was staring at his monitor. His brow was furrowed. He looked like someone trying to solve a riddle in a language he only half spoke. I paused. I should have kept walking. I should have gone into the supply closet and hidden until my shift ended. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I pretended to inspect the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall behind him. Noah had the version control history open on his main screen. He was looking at the commit, my commit. He toggled between the code and a Slack window. I could see the timestamp on the Slack message where Gavin claimed he had his epiphany. It was 7 in the morning. Then Noah looked back at the code commit timestamp. 2:41 in the morning. He frowned. He opened another window. It was the access log for the VPN. He scrolled down. He was looking for Gavin's username. I held my breath. I knew what he would find, or rather, what he would not find. Gavin had not logged into the VPN last night. He had been asleep. Noah sat back in his chair. He rubbed his eyes under his glasses. He looked over his shoulder at the party. Gavin was laughing, holding a plastic cup of champagne, recounting the moment of clarity to a captivated audience of interns. Noah looked back at the screen. He looked at the code again. He highlighted the 10 lines. He read them. He moved his lips slightly, tracing the logic. "Elegant," he whispered. He was not looking for a hero. He was looking for the truth, and the math was not adding up. I gripped the handle of my cleaning caddy tight. I needed to move. If he turned around and saw me hovering, he might connect the dots. I was the only other person in the building at 241. I slipped into the supply closet and closed the door. The closet was narrow and smelled of bleach and cardboard. I sat down on a stack of printer paper boxes. My heart was beating faster than it had when I was actually writing the code. This was the danger of the aftermath. The adrenaline of the heist was gone, leaving only the cold reality of the evidence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I pulled it out. It was a text message. I did not give my number to staff. It was listed in the emergency directory for facilities issues, right under the number for the plumber and the pest control guy. The number on the screen was familiar. I had seen it on the internal roster when I updated the phone tree last week. It was Noah Pierce. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the glass. I should delete it. I should pretend I never saw it. I should go out there and empty the trash cans and be the furniture. But I opened it. The message was short. It was polite. And it was terrifying. Hey, Nora. Sorry to bother you. I'm looking at the server access logs from last night. I see a manual login on machine 07 at 2:41 in the morning. That is the old terminal in the corner. I did not reply. A second bubble appeared. The timestamp matches the patch commit. The user ID is the old root admin. I felt a cold drop of sweat slide down my back. He knew. He did not know why, but he knew who. Machine 07 was my spot. Everyone knew I sat there to eat my lunch because it was the only desk where the air conditioning vent did not blow directly on my face. The third message came through. You are the only one who was here. Did you touch the code? I stared at the blinking cursor on my reply bar. This was the pivot point. I could lie. I could say I was cleaning the keyboard and hit some keys by accident. I could say I saw nothing. But Noah was smart. He had called the code elegant. He knew this was not an accident. I realized then that my invisibility had a flaw. I was invisible to the people who looked above them, but Noah was looking down. He was looking at the details. I typed a single character, a question mark. Then I deleted it. I typed, I was cleaning. It was a weak defense. Noah replied instantly. Gavin says he fixed it from home, but the VPN logs are empty. And the code style. It does not look like him. It uses a specific failover syntax that looks like the old legacy core, the stuff from 3 years ago. He was too observant. Nora. The next message read, Did you save us? I looked at the door of the supply closet. I could hear the muffled sound of laughter from the main room. They were toasting Gavin. They were toasting the genius. They were toasting the lie. I looked back at the phone. Do not tell anyone, I typed. I hit send. The reply came back 3 seconds later. I knew it. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. The secret was out. It was a small leak in the dam. Just a hairline fracture. But in a company built on pressure and ego, a hairline fracture was all it took to bring the whole wall down. I put the phone back in my pocket. I stood up. I picked up a roll of paper towels. I had a job to do. There was spilled champagne on the carpet, and the heroes were not going to clean it up themselves. The euphoria of the morning evaporated by 2 in the afternoon. It did not fade slowly. It was sucked out of the room like oxygen from a depressurized airlock. The catalyst was a single email from the National Grid Reliability Office. Marianne Voss forwarded it to the executive channel. But in a company this small, secrets had the lifespan of a fruit fly. Within 10 minutes, everyone knew the contents. The federal auditors were not satisfied with a miracle. They wanted a map. They demanded a step-by-step technical breakdown of the patch, including the specific user credentials of the architect who implemented it, the timestamp of the commit, and the pre-deployment security review logs. They wanted to know exactly who had touched the critical infrastructure of a national security asset in the middle of the night. They did not want a hero story. They wanted a liability assessment. The atmosphere in the office shifted instantly from a party to a police station waiting room. The Prosecco bottle was corked and shoved back into the fridge. The donuts were abandoned. The noise level dropped to a nervous murmur. I was in the server room, organizing a tangled mess of fiber optic cables in rack 4, when I saw Gavin Klein walk past the glass wall. He looked different. The swagger was gone. His shoulders were hunched, and he was walking with the frantic energy of a man realizing he had left his wallet in a taxi that was driving away. He was not heading to the break room to brag. He was heading to the secluded terminal in the finance office, the one with the privacy screen. He was panicking. I knew exactly why. He had claimed credit for the fix, but he could not produce the digital fingerprint to prove it. If he claimed he did it, the audit would show a discrepancy in the user logs. If he admitted he did not do it, he would be exposed as a liar and an incompetent leader who had no control over his own codebase. He was trapped, and a trapped animal does not think about justice. It thinks about survival. 10 minutes later, the narrative began to change. It started as a whisper in the Slack channels. Security concern, unauthorized access, rogue modification. Gavin had pivoted. He was no longer the genius architect who had saved the day with a moment of clarity. He was now the vigilant protector who had discovered a potential breach. He was spinning a new story. He claimed that while the patch worked, it had been implemented outside of protocol by an unknown actor, possibly a hacker or a disgruntled former employee, and that he was currently leading a forensic investigation to ensure the system was safe. He was criminalizing the solution he had just celebrated. I stood on a step stool, zip-tying a bundle of Cat6 cables. My hands were steady, but my stomach was churning. I had anticipated his ego. I had not fully anticipated his malice. He was preparing to hunt me down, not to thank me, but to prosecute me. The door to the server room opened. I did not turn around. I recognized the footsteps. They were soft, hesitant sneakers. Nora. It was Noah Pierce. I pulled the zip tie tight. The plastic made a sharp zipping sound. I trimmed the excess with my flush cutters before I looked down. Noah looked pale. He was holding his laptop against his chest like a shield. He checked the door behind him to make sure it was fully closed. The server fans were loud enough to drown out our conversation from the outside world. "You need to see this," he said. He opened his laptop and set it on a crash cart. He brought up the internal security dashboard. "Gavin is pulling the gate logs," Noah said. His voice was low. "He is cross-referencing the badge swipes with the login times. He knows the modification came from inside the building. He knows it was a physical terminal, not a remote VPN connection." I stepped down from the stool. "He is looking for a scapegoat." "He is looking for you," Noah corrected. I checked the terminal ID again. It matches the workstation in the corner. The one with the broken chair. I walked by there an hour ago. There was a sticky note on the floor under the desk. It had a coffee stain on it. It was the same brand of coffee you brew in the kitchenette. It was a flimsy piece of evidence, but in a witch hunt, even a coffee stain was enough to burn someone. "I am not going to say anything," Noah said quickly. He looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. He was young, and he still believed in fairness. "I know you fixed it. I analyzed the code again. It is brilliant. It is better than anything Gavin has written in 3 years. If they fire you, I will tell them the truth." "No," I said. Noah blinked. "What?" "Do not tell them the truth," I said. "And do not lie for me. If you stand up and say I did it, Gavin will destroy you too. He will say we colluded. He will say you gave me the password. You are a junior developer on a visa. You cannot afford to be collateral damage." "So I just let him paint you as a criminal?" Noah asked. "He is already planting the seeds. Look at the general channel." I looked at his screen. A message from HR had just gone out to the entire company. Subject important. Security protocol reminder. Team, effective immediately. Any access to the production environment outside of scheduled deployment windows will be treated as a severe violation of company policy. We are currently investigating an irregularity in last night's logs. We expect full cooperation. Zero tolerance. It was the death warrant. They were establishing the rules of the execution before they even had the prisoner in custody. They were framing the narrative so that when they found me, the fact that I saved the company would be irrelevant. The only thing that would matter was that I broke the rules. "I can handle Gavin," I said. I did not feel as confident as I sounded. "I just need you to do one thing. Don't let me be crushed alone. If they ask you technical questions about the patch, Answer them honestly. Tell them it works. Tell them it is solid. Do not let them roll back the code just to spite me." Noah looked at the floor, then back at me. He nodded. "Okay, but you should know. Gavin is asking it for the surveillance tapes from the hallway cameras." "The cameras in the hallway have been broken for 6 months," I said. "I put in the work order myself. They never approved the budget to fix them." A small, grim smile touched Noah's lips. "Right. I forgot who I was talking to." He took his laptop and left. I waited until the door clicked shut before I allowed myself to exhale. I was cornered. I knew it. Gavin was cornered. He knew it. We were two desperate people locked in a silent room, circling each other with knives. The only difference was that he had the title, the power, and the microphone. I only had the truth. I needed to know how far he was willing to go. I pulled out my phone. I had a remote monitoring app installed. It was a simple, text-based interface that mirrored the terminal at my desk. It was strictly forbidden, another firing offense to add to the pile. But right now, I did not care about the employee handbook. I logged into the ghost session I had left running on the background threads. I queried the system activity logs, not the standard logs that Gavin was looking at, but the deep system kernel logs that tracked the admin actions themselves. I saw it immediately. At 2:55 in the afternoon, 5 minutes after the HR email went out, a command had been issued from the Chief Technology Officer's account. Delete from system audit log, where timestamp between 02:00 and 04:00. My blood ran cold. Gavin was not just looking for a scapegoat. He was trying to erase the evidence entirely. He realized that he could not pin it on a hacker without the NGRO demanding a forensic investigation that would expose his own negligence. So he had decided on a new strategy: delete the history, claim the logs were corrupted. Claim the system glitch was a hardware anomaly that resolved itself. He was trying to bury the 10 lines of code. He was trying to delete the fix. If he succeeded, the system would revert. The bug would return. The demo on Friday would fail. The company would die. But Gavin would be safe. He could claim ignorance. He could say the system was unstable, and he needed more funding, more time, more runway. He would sacrifice $150 million just to save his own reputation. I watched the command execute on my tiny screen. It spun for a second, then a message returned. Error write protected. Operation denied by worm policy. I let out a sharp breath. The trap I had set at 3 in the morning had sprung. I had switched the logs to write once, read many. I had made them immutable. Gavin had tried to burn the library, and he had just found out the books were made of asbestos. But there was more. Because he had tried to delete the logs using his own admin credentials, the system had recorded the attempt. Access denied. User G. Klein attempted unauthorized deletion of protected records. I stared at the phone. This was it. This was the smoking gun. He had just created a permanent record of his own cover-up. He had tried to obstruct the very audit he was supposedly leading. I pocketed the phone. The fear in my chest began to harden into something else. Something colder. Something like steel. Gavin Klein thought he was hunting a mouse. He thought he could flush me out with threats and HR emails. He thought he could erase me. He did not realize that by trying to erase me, he had just written his own confession. I picked up my tool bag. I threw the snipped ends of the zip ties into the trash. I checked my reflection in the dark glass of the server rack. My ponytail was messy. My uniform polo was wrinkled. I looked like exactly what I was: the night support, the help. But as I walked out of the server room and back onto the floor, where the eyes of the staff were darting nervously around like fish in a tank that had just been tapped, I did not feel invisible anymore. I felt like the only person in the building who was truly awake. Let them hunt. I was ready to be found. But I would choose the time, and I would choose the place. And when I stepped into the light, I would make sure Gavin was standing right next to me, holding the match he tried to use to burn us all down. The email that summoned the entire company to the main conference room had no subject line. It contained only a time and a location. 4:15 in the afternoon, the aquarium, The aquarium was our largest meeting space, a glass-walled enclosure that occupied the center of the office. Usually, all-hands meetings were accompanied by the smell of cheap pepperoni pizza or the clinking of beer bottles. They were orchestrated events designed to force morale upon us. Today, there was no food. There were no drinks. There was only a terrifying, sterile silence and the hum of the overhead projector cooling fan. 60 people squeezed into the room. The developers stood in clusters, arms crossed, looking at their shoes. The marketing team sat in the front row, their smiles strained and brittle. I stood at the very back, near the trash can I had emptied 3 hours earlier. I leaned against the wall, trying to make myself as two-dimensional as possible. Marianne Voss stood at the head of the table. She was not looking at her tablet. She was looking at us. Her gaze swept across the room like a searchlight, cold and unblinking. To her right stood Gavin Klein. He looked composed, but his hands were clasped too tightly behind his back. He was vibrating with a frequency of anxiety that only I could see. Marianne waited until the last person had squeezed through the door. Then she nodded to the administrative assistant to close it. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot. "We are not here to celebrate," Marianne said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room without effort. "We are here because the National Grid Reliability Office has asked a question that I cannot answer, and I do not like being unable to answer questions." She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. "The patch that saved the simulation last night," she continued. "It was brilliant, it was unconventional, and it was deployed at 3 in the morning. The NGRO wants to meet the architect. They want to shake the hand of the person who saved their timeline." She stopped in front of Gavin. She did not look at him. She looked at the room. "So," she said, "who deployed the patch?" The room went deadly silent. Everyone looked at Gavin. It was a natural reflex. He was the CTO. He was the genius. He had spent the entire morning accepting high fives and talking about his intuition. The script was already written in their heads. They expected him to step forward, do a humble shrug, and accept the crown. Gavin did not step forward. He stood perfectly still. He was playing the long game. He wanted the room to answer for him. He wanted the collective assumption to become the truth, so he would not have to technically lie on the record. He smiled a tight, benevolent smile, waiting for the applause to start. But the applause did not start. Instead, a chair scraped against the floor. Noah Pierce stood up. He looked like he was about to vomit. His face was gray, and his hands were shaking so hard that he had to grip the back of the chair in front of him to stay steady. He looked at Gavin. Then he looked at Marianne. "It was not Gavin," Noah said. His voice cracked on the last syllable. It was a small sound, barely a whisper, but in the vacuum of the room, it was a thunderclap. Gavin's smile froze. He turned his head slowly toward Noah, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, Noah. It was not you," Noah said, louder this time. He was trembling, but he did not sit down. "The logs, the syntax, the timestamp, it was not you." The air in the room shifted. The developers looked at each other. Confusion rippled through the crowd. If it was not Gavin, then who? The senior engineers looked at the juniors. The juniors looked at the leads. They were scanning for a hero in their ranks, someone who had been hiding their brilliance. Noah took a deep breath. He did not point. He just turned his head. He looked past the rows of standing engineers. He looked past the marketing team. He looked all the way to the back of the room. He looked at me. The effect was immediate. The crowd followed his gaze. 60 heads turned in unison. They looked at the wall. They looked at the trash can. And then, finally, they saw the person standing next to it. They saw the woman in the gray polo shirt. They saw the night support. They saw the furniture. I felt the weight of their eyes physically. It was a crushing pressure. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. I wanted to sink into the drywall. I wanted to disappear, but I remembered the 10 lines of code. I remembered the elegance of the logic. I remembered that for once in 3 years, I was not the one who had made the mistake. I pushed myself off the wall. I took a step forward. "I did it," I said. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, a laugh broke out. It was a nervous, incredulous laugh. It came from one of the project managers in the front row. Then someone else joined in. It was not a mean laugh, exactly. It was the laughter of absurdity. It was the sound people make when a dog walks on its hind legs, or a toddler claims they flew a plane. It was the sound of a worldview protecting itself from a violation of the natural order. "Nora," someone whispered loudly. "The cable lady." "Good one," another voice said. Gavin let out a short, sharp exhale. He looked relieved. He thought it was a joke. He thought I was covering for someone, or just being crazy. He stepped forward, his confidence returning. Okay, Gavin said, raising his hands. "Let us get back to reality. Nora, we appreciate the humor, but this is a serious meeting." I did not smile. I did not back down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a USB drive. It was a prop. Really, I did not need it, but people like Gavin responded to physical objects. "I am not joking," I said. My voice was steady. I fixed the race condition in the handoff protocol. I added a non-blocking request and an exponential back-off. I changed the timeout from 50 milliseconds to 200. The laughter died instantly. The technical specificity of my words hit the room like a bucket of ice water. You cannot fake that kind of jargon. You cannot accidentally know the values of the timeout variables. Marianne Voss was staring at me. Her expression was unreadable. She motioned to the IT director sitting at the console controlling the projector. "Pull up the repository," she commanded. "Show me the diff." The IT director scrambled. He typed frantically. A moment later, the main screen behind Marianne flickered to life. The code repository appeared. "Open the commit from last night," Marianne said. The screen refreshed. There it was, 10 lines of green text against a black background. And right above it, in the metadata header, was the user information. User: Watson Night Ops Time, 02:41:15 a.m. EST. The silence that fell over the room now was different. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of shock. It was the silence of 45 highly paid engineers realizing that the person who cleaned their whiteboards had just outcoded them. Gavin stared at the screen. His face went pale, then red. He looked at the code. He looked at me. He looked at Marianne. He saw his narrative collapsing. He saw the hero statue crumbling into dust. He reacted with the speed of a predator. "This is a violation," Gavin snapped. His voice was sharp, cutting through the awe in the room. He pointed a finger at me. "This is a severe security breach. You accessed the production kernel without authorization. You used a privileged account to modify critical infrastructure. This is not a fix. This is an attack." He turned to Marianne, his eyes wide and desperate. "Marianne, look at what she did. She bypassed the review board. She bypassed the QA process. She put the entire contract at risk. We do not know what else she touched. She could have planted a back door. She could have stolen data. This is grounds for immediate termination and legal action." He was good. I had to give him that. He took the evidence of my competence and twisted it into evidence of my criminality. He was betting on the company's fear. He was betting that they would be more afraid of a rogue employee than they were grateful for a working product. The room wavered. I saw the doubt creeping into the faces of the developers. They were rule followers by nature. They respected the process. And Gavin was right. I had broken every rule in the book. "I saved the deal," I said quietly. "The system was going to crash. You know it. I know it." "You broke the law," Gavin shouted. He was losing control. "You are a night support assistant. You change cables. You do not touch the kernel." He looked at the HR director. "Escort her out, now, before she does any more damage." The HR director stood up, looking uncertain. "Sit down," Marianne said. The HR director sat down. Marianne turned slowly to face Gavin. She did not look angry. She looked curious. It was a far more dangerous look. "Gavin," she said, "you are the Chief Technology Officer. You designed the security architecture of this company. Exactly, Gavin said, nodding vigorously. And she violated it. The account she used, Marianne said, gesturing to the screen. It says N. Watson. That is her personal account. It is not a stolen root password. It is her own login. She must have escalated privileges, Gavin sputtered. She hacked it. No, Marianne said. She tapped her tablet. I am looking at the Active Directory right now. Nora Watson has break glass permissions. That is the highest level of emergency access we have. It allows full read and write capability to the core during a catastrophic failure event. Gavin froze. Break glass permissions require a digital signature from a C-level executive, Marianne said. Her voice dropped an octave. I did not sign it. The CFO did not sign it. She took a step closer to him. Why does a night assistant have break glass access? Gavin, unless you signed it yourself. The trap snapped shut. I watched Gavin's face. I saw the memory return to him. 3 years ago, the early days, he had been the only one working late. He needed someone to restart the servers manually while he debugged from home. He had been too lazy to drive in, so he had given the night cleaner access. He had signed the form because he did not want to get off his couch. He had thought I was too stupid to understand what he was giving me. He thought I was just a pair of hands. He had handed me the key to his kingdom because he could not be bothered to unlock the door himself. Gavin stammered. That was for monitoring. It was a legacy setting. It was a mistake. A mistake, Marianne repeated. You gave root access to an employee you claim is a security risk, and then, when that employee used that access to fix the bug you could not find, you tried to fire her for it. She went rogue, Gavin yelled. He was sweating now. She embarrassed the team. She saved the team, Noah Pierce said from the audience. Marianne looked at Noah. Then she looked at me. Nora, she said, come to the front. I pushed off the wall. I walked through the parted crowd. I walked past the developers who made 3 times my salary. I walked past the marketing team. I walked up to the head of the table. I stood next to Gavin. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. Marianne looked at the code on the screen, then back at me. Walk us through it, she said. Explain the 10 lines. Marianne, this is insane, Gavin protested. You cannot let her. Quiet, Marianne said. She did not even look at him. The floor belongs to the person who wrote the code. She looked at me and nodded. I took a deep breath. I looked at the sea of faces. I saw doubt. I saw jealousy. But I also saw respect. I pointed at the screen. Line 1, I said. We stop asking for permission to run. We start asking for forgiveness if we are late. And for the first time in 3 years, the room listened. The silence in the room following my technical explanation was not empty. It was heavy with the ghost of a memory that I had tried to exorcise for 3 years. As I stood there, watching Gavin Klein's face crumble from arrogance into defensive panic, the timeline in my head rewound, the glass walls of the aquarium dissolved, and the faces of the stunned engineers faded away. It was 3 years ago. I was 29 years old. I was not wearing a gray polo shirt with a coffee stain on the hem. I was wearing a navy blue blazer and a silk blouse I had bought specifically for the interview. I held a leather portfolio containing a resume that I was proud of. It detailed 6 years of experience in high-availability infrastructure. It listed the project where I architected a load-balancing system for a regional logistics network. It did not have the name of a famous Ivy League school at the top, but it had the blood and sweat of real engineering work. I sat across from Gavin. He was 3 years younger then, but the ego was fully formed. He spent the first 10 minutes of the interview checking his watch. He did not look at my code samples. He did not ask me about the scaling challenges I had solved. He asked me what music I listened to. He asked me if I played ping pong. I tried to steer the conversation back to the job. I started talking about failover redundancy. I explained a concept I had for a distributed locking mechanism, the very same logic I had just used to save his company 10 hours ago. Gavin had laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. He told me I was overthinking it. He said HelloCrest Dynamics was about moving fast and breaking things, not building safety nets for scenarios that would never happen. He called my approach academic and fear-based. He cut me off in the middle of a sentence to take a phone call about a lunch order. I walked out of that room feeling small. I felt like I had brought a blueprint to a finger painting class. The rejection email arrived 4 hours later. It was a form letter. It did not mention my skills. It did not mention my experience. It contained the phrase that kills more careers than incompetence ever could. Not a culture fit. It meant I was not cool enough. It meant I did not look like them. It meant I took the work too seriously for a playground disguised as a startup. But I had a problem. My landlord did not accept moral victory as a form of payment. My savings were gone. I needed a job, and the tech market in Cleveland was stagnant. I could not wait another month. So I did something that felt like cutting off a limb. I opened my resume file. I deleted the title, Senior Infrastructure Engineer. I deleted the details of the logistics project. I deleted the references to my certifications. I stripped my professional identity down to the studs until I looked like exactly what they wanted. Harmless. Unambitious. Safe. I applied for the open position in night operations support. The job description required the ability to lift 50 pounds and follow a checklist. Gavin did not even interview me the second time. The HR manager hired me over the phone. She said I seemed reliable and grateful. She had no idea she was hiring the engineer her CTO had just rejected. I walked back into the building 2 weeks later, wearing the gray uniform, and Gavin walked right past me in the hallway without a flicker of recognition. I was no longer a person who didn't fit the culture. I was part of the infrastructure. I was invisible. The memory snapped back to the present. The aquarium was still silent, but the vibe had shifted. My explanation of the code had proven my competence, but it had not yet explained the cruelty of my position. Then, a sound cut through the room. It was the synchronized chime of notification alerts hitting 5 phones at once. Marianne Voss looked down at her tablet. The general counsel, a man named Robert who usually slept through these meetings, looked at his phone. The HR director looked at her laptop. Someone had forwarded an email. It was an old email, a thread from 3 years ago. Marianne read it. Her face, usually a mask of corporate stoicism, twitched. A vein in her temple began to pulse. She looked up from the screen and fixed her eyes on Gavin. "Gavin," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly soft. "Do you remember the recruitment notes you sent to HR regarding Nora's original application?" Gavin blinked. He looked like a man trying to remember which lie he had told to whom. "I interview hundreds of people, Marianne. I cannot recall every specific note." "Let me refresh your memory," Marianne said. She held the tablet up. She did not need to project it on the big screen. The words were acidic enough to burn without magnification. She read aloud. "Candidate Watson is a bore. She talks about safety protocols like she is running a nuclear plant, not a startup. She is a paper genius. Good on technicals, maybe, but she is an odd fit. She will bring the vibe down. She is not one of us. Reject her, and keep her away from the dev team. She asks too many questions." The words hung in the air. Paper genius. Odd fit. Not one of us. I saw the reaction ripple through the room. The junior developers, the ones who had laughed earlier, stopped smiling. They looked at their shoes. They realized that the culture they were so proud of was just a velvet rope designed to keep people like me out. They realized that they were not the best and brightest. They were just the ones Gavin liked to have a beer with. Noah Pierce looked furious. He glared at the back of Gavin's head with a hatred that was pure and white-hot. "But there is more," Marianne said. She scrolled down. "There is a reply from you, Gavin, dated 2 weeks later." When Nora applied for the night support role, Gavin was sweating profusely now. He dabbed his forehead with his sleeve. "Marianne, this is ancient history. It is irrelevant." "Is it?" Marianne asked. "Here is what you wrote." "Wait, is this the same woman, the boring one?" Perfect. Put her on the night shift. She can reset the routers. Just make sure she stays in her lane. I do not want her thinking she is an engineer just because she knows how to type, and if she tries to transfer departments, block it." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. This was not just bias. This was sabotage. He had not just rejected me. He had actively suppressed me. He had recognized my name, remembered my potential, and decided to shackle me to a server rack in the dark so I would never threaten his intellectual dominance. I looked at the faces around me. I saw shame. I saw the realization that for 3 years, they had treated an expert like a servant because a man with an ego problem told them to. I saw the fear in their eyes, too. They realized that if Gavin could do this to me, he could do it to any of them. The family atmosphere of Hallowcrest Dynamics was a lie. It was a dictatorship. But the final blow came from the corner of the room. Robert, the general counsel, stood up. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless a lawsuit was imminent. He was looking at his phone with a grim expression. "Marianne," Robert said, "I just ran a search on the email thread ID." "And?" Marianne asked. "This thread was flagged 3 years ago," Robert said. "There was an automated flag from the HR compliance system. It detected language indicative of discriminatory hiring practices. Specifically, the phrase, 'odd fit,' combined with the rejection of a qualified female candidate." Gavin looked like he was about to faint. "What happened to the flag?" Marianne asked. "It was dismissed," Robert said. He looked directly at Gavin. "There is a manual override note attached to the file. It says, 'Do not file this. False positive. User requested deletion of record. The user ID on the override is yours. Gavin.'" The silence that followed was absolute. This was no longer an HR issue. This was a legal catastrophe. Gavin had not just been a bad boss. He had actively destroyed evidence of his own bias to prevent a potential lawsuit. He had exposed the company to federal liability. He had turned a personnel decision into a cover-up. Marianne slowly lowered the tablet. She looked at Gavin not as a partner, not as a genius, but as a cancer that had metastasized in the heart of her company. "You buried her," Marianne said. It was not a question. "You knew she was good. You knew she was better than the candidates you hired because they wore the right sneakers. And you buried her in the basement so you would never have to compete with her." Gavin tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the room, searching for an ally. He found none. The tribe he had built, the culture he had carefully curated, had turned against him. They saw him for what he was. He was not a visionary. He was a gatekeeper who was afraid of anyone who held a key. I stood there, feeling the cold air of the room on my skin. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a deep, aching exhaustion. I looked at Gavin, and I did not see a monster. I saw a small, insecure man who had spent 3 years building a fortress to protect himself from a woman who just wanted to write good code. "I am not a paper genius," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the tension. "And I am not an odd fit. I am the person who just saved your job. Gavin, even if you spent 3 years trying to make sure I did not have one." Marianne turned to me. Her eyes were hard, but there was a new light in them, a respect that had not been there 10 minutes ago. "Robert," she said to the lawyer, "pull the full employment file. Every review, every email, every log." She looked at Gavin. "And Gavin," she said, "stop talking." The adrenaline from the all-hands meeting had barely subsided when Gavin Klein cornered me. He did not do it publicly. He waited until I was in the service corridor behind the break room, refilling the paper towel dispensers. He appeared like a shadow, standing between me and the exit sign. The arrogance was gone from his posture, replaced by a rigid, predatory tension. "My office," he said. It was not a request. "Now," I followed him. I did not have to. I had the CEO's favor for the moment, but old habits die hard, and curiosity is a powerful force. I wanted to see what a man looks like when he knows the walls are closing in. His office was a shrine to his own ego. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Cleveland, a customized standing desk made of reclaimed wood, and a shelf full of awards that I now suspected he had bought rather than earned. He closed the door and locked it. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. He slid it across the glass surface of his desk. "Sit down, Nora," he said. I remained standing. "I am comfortable." Gavin sighed. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Look, today was unfortunate. Tensions were high. I said things I should not have said. You said things that were technically true but contextually damaging. We are both professionals. We should settle this like professionals." He tapped the envelope. "Inside that envelope is a severance agreement. It includes a payout equivalent to 12 months of your current salary. There is also a consulting bonus attached. $20,000, immediate wire transfer." I looked at the envelope. It was thick. It represented more money than I had made in the last 2 years combined. "And the catch?" I asked. "It is standard," Gavin said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just a non-disclosure agreement, a mutual disparagement clause. You agree to leave the company quietly. You agree that your access to the system was a one-time irregularity and that you will not discuss the technical details of the patch with external parties." "You mean with the NGRO?" I said. "They are a federal agency, Nora," Gavin said, leaning forward. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "They do not want to hear that a night support staffer fixed their grid. It makes them look bad. It makes us look unstable. They want to hear that the CTO led a rapid response team. It is better for the stock. It is better for the deal. It is better for everyone." "It is better for you," I corrected. Gavin's face hardened. The nice guy mask slipped. "Let us be real. You have a win today. Great. But tomorrow, you are still the person who broke into a federal system. You violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. I authorized that break-glass access 3 years ago. Yes, but I can argue in court that it was revoked verbally and you exploited a legacy loophole. Do you have the money for a defense attorney? Do you have the savings to fight HaloCrest Dynamics in a lawsuit that could drag on for 5 years? It was a bluff. We both knew it. Marianne would never allow him to sue the person who saved the contract, but the threat was designed to trigger the poverty trauma he knew I had. He knew I needed this job. He knew I had taken the night shift because I was desperate. He was weaponizing my survival instinct against me. "You are threatening me," I said. "I am offering you a parachute," Gavin said. "Take the money. Sign the paper. Go find a job where you fit in. Leave the heavy lifting to the people who are built for it." I looked at the envelope again. Then I looked at Gavin. There was something in his eyes that did not match his words. It was not just anger, it was panic. If this was just about credit, he would try to charm me. If this was just about the culture fit email, he would be apologizing to save face with HR. But he was trying to buy my silence on the technical details. He specifically mentioned not discussing the patch with the NGRO. "Why?" I asked. Gavin blinked. "Why what?" "Why are you so afraid of me talking to the feds?" I asked. "The bug is fixed. The system is green. Even if I tell them I did it, the worst that happens is you look incompetent. You are offering me $50,000 to hide incompetence. That is too high a price. You are cheap. Gavin, you would not pay that much unless you were hiding something criminal." "You are paranoid," Gavin snapped. "The NGRO has requested a technical review session tomorrow morning, a closed-door meeting. They want a deep dive into the failure mode. I am going to conduct that review. I cannot have you in the room contradicting me on the nuance of the code. I need a unified front." "You want to go into that room alone," I said. "I am the CTO," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "It is my code. Is it?" I asked. I turned and walked to the door. "If you walk out that door, the deal is off the table," Gavin yelled after me. "I will bury you in legal fees. I will make sure you never work in this industry again." I unlocked the door and stepped out. I did not look back. My heart was hammering, but my mind was cold and clear. Gavin was desperate to keep me away from the technical review. He was desperate to control the narrative of why the bug happened, not just how it was fixed. I went back to my desk. Not the workstation in the corner, but a terminal in the server room that was isolated from the main network monitoring tools. I needed to see the history, not the history of my fix, but the history of the break. I logged in. I pulled up the repository again. I knew where the bottleneck had occurred. It was in the handoff logic. I had fixed it by loosening the constraints, but why were the constraints so tight in the first place? I scrolled back through the commit history. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, I found it. It was a commit from 8 weeks ago. The author was G. Klein. The commit message was innocuous. Refactor performance optimization for simulation stability. I opened the diff. I read the code, and then I read it again. Gavin had not optimized anything. He had deliberately introduced a sleep command into the thread lock. It was tiny, a micro delay, but he had placed it inside a loop that scaled with data volume. He had engineered the bottleneck. I sat back on the crash cart, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This was not a mistake. This was not bad coding. This was sabotage. Gavin had planted a time bomb in his own architecture. Why I looked at the date of the commit. 8 weeks ago, that was right around the time the board was discussing his performance bonus. It was right around the time rumors started circulating that the NGRO was considering other vendors. Gavin needed a crisis. He needed a fire that was big enough to threaten the company, but controlled enough that he could put it out. He wanted the system to struggle during the preliminary tests so he could swoop in at the 11th hour, deploy a miracle fix, which would just be removing his own sabotage and look like a god. He wanted to prove that the project was impossible without his genius, but he had miscalculated. The data load from the NGRO was higher than he expected. The tiny delay he planted had spiraled into a race condition he could not control. The fire had jumped the firebreak. That was why he was awake at 2 a.m. but afraid to log in. He was trying to figure out how to undo his own trap without leaving a footprint that looked like guilt. And that was why he was terrified of me. I had fixed the symptom, but if I or the NGRO auditors looked too closely at the root cause, we would find his fingerprints on the matchstick. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Marianne. Subject: NGRO review preparation. Nora. The NGRO panel has requested your presence tomorrow at 9. Gavin insists on leading the presentation, but they were quite specific. They want the person who wrote the patch. Please meet me in the lobby at 8. I looked at the screen. I looked at the code Gavin had written to strangle his own creation. He was going to walk into that room tomorrow and lie to federal agents. He was going to try to spin the failure as a complex system anomaly. I stood up. I did not feel like the night support anymore. I felt like the prosecutor. I printed the commit history. I printed the diff of his sabotage. I printed the timestamp of his performance refactor. Gavin thought he could buy my silence with $50,000. He thought he could scare me with an NDA. He forgot the one variable that matters most in a revenge story. You cannot buy the person you already sold out. I took the papers and folded them into my pocket. I would not sign his deal. I would not take his money. I was going to the meeting, and I was going to bring the one thing Gavin Klein could not spin, could not gaslight, and could not delete. I was bringing the source code. The conference room in Pittsburgh smelled of lemon water and federal bureaucracy. It was a sterile, windowless box designed to suck the emotion out of any conversation, leaving only the dry bones of policy and liability. The table was mahogany, long enough to land a small aircraft on, and at the far end sat the 5 members of the National Grid Reliability Office Acceptance Council. They looked like a row of judges, dressed in identical shades of charcoal gray, their faces set in expressions of professional skepticism. I sat on the left side of the table, next to Marianne Voss. On her other side sat Gavin Klein. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car, and he had spent the last 20 minutes adjusting his cuffs. He looked polished, presidential, and absolutely terrified. I was wearing a clean white button-down shirt and black slacks, no jacket, no watch, no props, just a thin folder of papers in front of me and the laptop connected to the projector. The director of the NGRO, a man named Silas Vance, who had the eyes of a hawk and the patience of a stone, tapped his pen on the table. "Ms. Watson," Vance said. His voice was gravelly. "We have read the incident report submitted by Mr. Klein. It describes a collaborative surge to resolve a latency anomaly. However, our technical team found the patch implementation to be unique. We would like to hear your version of the architecture." Gavin cleared his throat. "Director, if I may just frame the context." "Mr. Klein," Vance said without looking at him, "you have done a lot of framing. I want to see the picture. Ms. Watson, please." I stood up. I did not walk to the podium. I stayed at the table. I did not need to loom over them. The truth does not need height. "The failure was not a latency anomaly," I said. "It was a race condition. Imagine two people trying to walk through a single door at the exact same moment. In a polite society, one person steps back and lets the other pass. In the previous architecture, both people tried to force their way through, got stuck, and then the building burned down." I pressed a key on the laptop. The screen behind me changed. It was not a complex diagram with arrows and clouds. It was a simple timeline. "The system was designed to lock the database during the handoff," I continued. "This works fine for low traffic. But at 90% load, the lock became a bottleneck. The primary node would hold the lock, waiting for a confirmation that never came because the backup node was timed out. It was a circle of silence. My patch broke the circle. I instructed the backup node to wait, back off, and check again. I taught the system manners." Vance nodded slowly. "Simple. Why was it not in the original spec?" Gavin jumped in. "Complexity drift, Director, as we scaled. The original parameters were sabotage," I said. The room went deadly quiet. The silence was sudden and violent. Marianne turned her head so fast I heard her neck crack. Gavin looked like I had just slapped him. "Excuse me?" Vance asked. He leaned forward. "I said it was sabotage." I repeated. My voice was calm. I felt my heart beating against my ribs. But my hands were steady. The bottleneck was not natural drift. It was engineered. "Nora," Gavin hissed. "Watch yourself." "Mr. Klein," Vance snapped. "Silence." He turned back to me. "Go on." "Ms. Watson." I clicked the next slide. It showed the commit history I had pulled from the server the day before. The text was large enough for everyone to read. 8 weeks ago, I said, a change was committed to the handoff module. It was tagged as a performance refactor. The commit message claimed it was optimizing the thread management. But if you look at line 402, you will see a command introduced into the loop. I pointed to the screen. Thread. Sleep variable delay. This command serves no functional purpose in a production environment, I said. It introduces a deliberate pause, a micro delay. Under low load, it is invisible, but under the heavy load of your acceptance test, this delay compounds. It creates the exact timeout scenario that crashed the simulation. I looked at the council. The system did not break because it was weak, I said. It broke because someone put a stick in the spokes. Vance looked at the screen. Then he looked at Gavin. Who authorized this commit? It was a team effort, Gavin stammered. He was sweating now, a sheen of moisture on his forehead. We were experimenting with throttling to prevent overheating. It was a theoretical model that accidentally... The user ID on the commit is yours, Mr. Klein, I said. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the metadata. Author G. Klein. And, I added, when the crash happened 3 nights ago, the logs show that you were awake. You monitored the failure. You did not intervene. You let it burn until the very last second, presumably so you could step in and revert your own sabotage to save the day. But the fire got too big. You lost control. And that is when I stepped in. Gavin stood up. This is preposterous. She is a disgruntled support staffer. She is twisting standard debugging code into a conspiracy theory to leverage a severance package. Marianne. Tell them. Marianne did not speak. She was staring at the screen. She was looking at the timestamp of the sabotage commit. She was doing the math in her head. 8 weeks ago, the bonus negotiations, the stalling, it all fit. "Sit down, Mr. Klein," Vance said. His voice was like a gavel. "I will not sit down," Gavin shouted. "I built this system. I am the only reason it works. This woman is a security risk. She hacked the logs." "Speaking of logs," I said, I reached into my folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the command line history from yesterday afternoon. "Mr. Klein claims I am a security risk," I said to the council. "He claims he is concerned about integrity, but yesterday, at 2:55 in the afternoon, a command was issued from the CTO's terminal." I slid the paper across the mahogany table toward Vance. "The command was to delete the audit history for the night of the patch," I said. "He tried to wipe the record. He tried to erase the evidence of who fixed the system, and in doing so, he would have erased the evidence of who broke it." Vance picked up the paper. He read it. He looked at the error message I had highlighted. "Operation denied. Write once read. Many policy active." "He failed," I said, "because I locked the logs 3 hours before he tried to burn them." Vance passed the paper to the woman next to him. He took off his glasses. He looked at Gavin with an expression that was no longer skeptical. It was disgusted. "Mr. Klein," Vance said, "did you attempt to delete federal audit records?" "I was cleaning the database," Gavin yelled. He was unraveling. The cool executive was gone. It was routine maintenance. The logs were corrupted by her unauthorized access. I was protecting the integrity of the project. "By deleting it?" Vance asked. "It is my network," Gavin screamed. "I can delete whatever I want." The echo of his shout bounced off the walls. Marianne Voss stood up. She looked pale, but her eyes were flint. She realized what was happening. If the NGRO believed that HalloCrest Dynamics was actively engaged in fraud and evidence tampering, the contract would be the least of her problems. The company would be blacklisted. They would be sued into oblivion. She had to cut the limb to save the body. "Mr. Klein," Marianne said. Her voice was ice. "You are relieved of duty. Effective immediately." Gavin whirled on her. "You cannot do that. The board will ratify it within the hour," Marianne said. "Sit down and be quiet, or I will have security remove you from this building." Gavin looked at her. He looked at the council. He realized there was no air left in the room for him. He sank back into his chair. Defeated. A man who had built a tower of glass and thrown the first stone himself. Vance turned back to me. He ignored Gavin completely. "Ms. Watson," Vance said, "this is a mess. Your CTO sabotaged the build. Your leadership failed to detect it, and you, a night support staffer, intervened without authorization." "Yes," I said. "I did. You understand that under normal circumstances, I would walk away from this table and never look back." Vance said, "I would cancel the contract and refer this to the Department of Justice." My stomach tightened. I had exposed the truth, but I might have killed the company in the process. "However," Vance continued, "the grid needs this software, and the patch you wrote, it works. It is resilient. It is the only honest thing I have seen from your company in 6 months." He leaned forward, clasping his hands. "I am not signing this contract with Mr. Klein," Vance said. "And frankly, Ms. Voss, I am hesitant to sign it with you until your house is in order. But I need the system live in 3 weeks." He looked me in the eye. "Ms. Watson, are you willing to be the signatory technical lead on this deployment?" I blinked. "Excuse me. The NGRO requires a named engineer to accept personal liability for the system integrity," Vance said. "Usually, it is the CTO, but I do not trust your CTO. I trust the person who locked the logs. I trust the person who fixed the race condition." He tapped the contract on the table. "If you sign as the lead engineer, we proceed. We verify the code under your supervision. We deploy on your timeline. If you do not sign, we walk." I looked at Marianne. She was stunned. She was looking at the woman she had ignored for 3 years, realizing that the fate of her $150 million company was now entirely in my hands. She nodded at me. It was a desperate, pleading nod. I looked at Gavin. He was staring at the table, his hands shaking. Then I looked at Vance. "I will sign," I said, "but on one condition." "Name it," Vance said. "I want the entire engineering team to undergo a code review audit," I said. "And I want the authority to restructure the deployment protocol. No more secrets, no more genius culture. We build it boring, and we build it right," Vance smiled. It was the first time he had smiled all morning. "Boring is exactly what we pay for, Ms. Watson," he said. He slid the contract across the table. I picked up the pen. It was heavy. It felt real. I signed my name. Not Nora the night support. Not Nora the invisible woman. Nora Watson. Lead engineer. I capped the pen. The sound was sharp and final. I had not just saved the deal. I had just taken the keys to the kingdom, and this time I was going to change the locks. The flight back from Pittsburgh was silent. We took a private charter that the company used for closing big deals, but nobody ordered champagne. Marianne Voss spent the entire hour staring out the window at the clouds, while Gavin Klein sat in the back row, furiously typing on his phone. I sat in the middle, reading a paperback novel. Though I did not absorb a single word, I was preparing for the final act. We went straight from the airfield to the Hallowcrest boardroom. The full board of directors was waiting, along with the entire legal team. The mood was not anxious, it was funereal. They knew the NGRO had given an ultimatum, and they knew the company was balancing on the edge of a razor. Gavin walked in first. He had regained some of his color during the flight. He had had time to think, time to spin, and time to formulate one last desperate lie. He took his seat at the end of the table, smoothing his tie. He looked at the board members with a look of righteous indignation. "Before we begin," Gavin said, his voice loud and projecting confidence he did not feel, "I need to address the accusations made in Pittsburgh. The NGRO director has been misled. The code commit regarding the sleep command was a misunderstood stress test parameter, and the log deletion attempt was a standard hygiene protocol that got flagged by a misconfigured permission set." Marianne sat down at the head of the table. She looked exhausted. "Gavin, we have the audit trail. We have the emails. Stop digging." "I am not digging. Marianne," Gavin said. He stood up and pointed a finger at me. "I am trying to save this company from a saboteur. You are all listening to her because she fixed a bug, but you are not asking how she fixed it or what else she put in there while she had root access." He looked around the room, making eye contact with every board member. "I ran a scan on her patch during the flight," Gavin lied. "I knew he had not run anything. He had been texting his personal lawyer. There is a back door. She installed a secondary entry point in the kernel. She fixed the bug to gain your trust, but she left a key under the mat so she can come back later and hold us hostage. She is not a hero. She is a black hat hacker who exploited a crisis." A murmur went through the room. The board members were money people, not tech people. The word backdoor scared them. It implied theft. It implied ransomware. It implied that their $150 million asset was compromised. "Is this true?" one of the investors asked, looking at me with sudden suspicion. "She will deny it, of course," Gavin said quickly, cutting off my chance to speak. "But think about it. Why would a night support assistant know how to patch a federal grid system unless she had been studying it for months, unless she had been looking for weaknesses? She set this up. She waited for the failure. And then she swooped in. If you sign that contract with her as the lead, you are handing the keys to a criminal." It was a good story. It played on their paranoia. It painted me as the villain and him as the vigilant protector who had just discovered the plot. Marianne looked at me. "Nora?" I stood up. I did not look at the board. I looked directly at Gavin. "I did not install a back door," I said calmly. "I installed a guardrail." "Semantics," Gavin shouted. "It is unauthorized code." I opened the internal repository on the boardroom screen. I navigated to a file that nobody had looked at yet. It was a small script, buried in the validation library. When I wrote the patch at 3 in the morning, I said, addressing the room, I knew that the person who broke the system originally might try to break it again. If the sabotage was intentional, they would not stop just because I fixed the race condition. They would try to reintroduce the failure to prove that my fix was unstable. They would try to create chaos to cover their tracks. I pointed to the screen. So I wrote 10 more lines of code. This is a watcher script. It monitors the specific variables in the handoff protocol. It does not change anything. It just watches. And if anyone tries to modify the timeout threshold or reintroduce a sleep command without a signed authorization token, it blocks the change and logs the attempt. Gavin's face went gray. He stopped moving. He stopped breathing. Last night, I continued, at 11:45 in the evening, while the rest of us were preparing for the NGRO meeting, the system flagged an intrusion. I pulled up the log file generated by my guardrail. Someone tried to modify the timeout variable, I said. They tried to set it back to 50 milliseconds. They tried to break the patch before the NGRO review. They wanted the system to crash during the demo in Pittsburgh so that I would look incompetent and the old architecture would have to be reinstated. I looked at Gavin. The guardrail blocked the change, I said, and it recorded the user. I highlighted the line on the screen. User G. Klein, IP address 192.168.1.5, Executive Office Wi-Fi. You were in the office last night. Gavin, I said. You tried to break the system again. You were willing to tank the $150 million deal just to frame me for the failure. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Gavin looked at the screen. He looked at the IP address. He knew he could not deny it. He had been desperate. He had been arrogant. He thought he was the only one who knew how to play the game. But he had forgotten that the game is played on a board, and I had built the board. Marianne Voss stood up. She did not look at Gavin with anger anymore. She looked at him with the cold detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. Security, she said into the intercom. 2 uniformed guards entered the room. Escort Mr. Klein to his office to collect his personal effects, Marianne said. Then escort him out of the building. His access badges are revoked. His devices are to be wiped remote immediately. Marianne, wait, Gavin pleaded. His voice was small, stripped of all its bluster. We can work this out. I was just testing the security. It was a red team exercise. Get him out, Marianne said. Gavin Klein, the genius architect, the man who built a culture of noise and ego, was led out of the room. He did not look back. He slumped in the grip of the guards, a man whose entire reality had dissolved because he underestimated the woman who changed his printer toner. The door closed. The board members looked at Marianne. They looked at me. We have a decision to make, Marianne said. The NGRO deal is conditional. They require Nora Watson to be the technical lead. If we refuse, we lose the contract. And given what just happened, we likely face a federal investigation for attempted fraud. The chairman of the board, an elderly man who had not spoken a word until now, looked at me over his spectacles. Can you deliver the project, Ms. Watson? Yes, I said, but not with the current team structure. I need full autonomy. I need to hire based on skill, not culture fit, and I need a budget to fix the technical debt that Gavin hid for 3 years. Done, the chairman said. Make it happen. I walked out of the boardroom 20 minutes later. The office was quiet. The news had traveled fast, faster than any fiber optic cable could carry it. The genius team was sitting at their desks, but they were not working. They were watching. I walked down the main corridor. It was the same hallway I had walked down 1,000 times with my cleaning cart, invisible, ignored, treated like an obstacle to be stepped around. But today, the air was different. As I passed the glass walls of the developer's bullpen, heads turned. They did not look through me. They looked at me. Noah Pierce gave me a small, subtle nod from his desk. The others just watched. There was fear in their eyes. Yes, They were wondering if I would fire them. They were wondering if I would be as cruel as Gavin. But mostly, there was respect. They realized that the person who held the power was not the one with the loudest voice or the most expensive sneakers. It was the person who knew how the machine worked. I reached the front doors. I pushed them open and stepped out into the cool evening air of Cleveland. The sun was setting, painting the glass building in shades of orange and fire. I took a deep breath. It tasted of exhaust and victory. I had spent 3 years in the dark. I had spent 3 years listening to them lie. I had spent 3 years fixing their mistakes while they took the credit. They thought I was silent because I was weak. They thought I was silent because I was afraid. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder and walked toward the bus stop. I would be back tomorrow. I had a team to reorganize. I had a system to rebuild. I had $150 million to earn. I looked back at the building one last time. Silence is not weak. Silence is just waiting until your enemy hands you the hammer. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your location so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing the underdog win, please make sure to subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe, and remember, always check the logs.